So I was working full-time in the ICU, going to grad school part-time, and then also teaching nursing part-time. That left zero time for me. My use ended with overdosing in the bathroom at work on a night shift. Something that I longed for and was so hard to find was other people, other healthcare professionals that had gone through or were going through or went through what I did. I wanted that so badly. So, if this is out there, if this was searchable and someone finds it, I hope they listen to it, because I think this is why I do want to put myself out there and be vulnerable, even though it's still terrifying, because I want someone to know, like, you're not alone, you'll get through this. Don't feel like it's so dark right now. Hold on to that little glimpse of light, because we're here with you to guide you.
Welcome to Health Professionals in Recovery, a podcast for healthcare practitioners interested in substance use disorder, harm reduction, and recovery from addiction. Our hope is to provide education and support for those struggling in silence, recovering, and those who care for patients who suffer with substance use disorder. For more resources, please visit our website at www.healthprosinrecovery.com or follow us on Twitter at HPIR Podcast. And now, the hosts of Health Professionals in Recovery, Sean Fogler and Bill Kinkle.
Well, welcome to Health Professionals in Recovery. And our guest tonight is Rachel Shuster. Rachel is a registered nurse and a person in recovery from substance use disorder. As a high-achieving high school schooler and college student, she never imagined that she, like many, would fall victim to the destruction of mind and mood-altering substances. Following what some may consider a relatively short period of substance use, she has since found her individualized path to sustained recovery and now works as a certified addictions registered nurse, helping people in the Greater Pittsburgh Area in reaching their recovery goals as well, particularly those with opioid use disorder. Recognizing that secrets die in the light, she is passionate about sharing her story, but is also interested in advocacy, evidence-based practice, harm reduction, and policy change within the addictions field. Rachel graduated from Waynesburg University in 2012 with her Bachelor of Science in Nursing. Upon graduation, Rachel worked in critical care for over 4 years prior to her switching specialties to addictions nursing following her personal journey through addiction to recovery. Since, she has attained her certification in addictions nursing and has spoken at various nursing schools as well as high schools in the Pittsburgh area. So, Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sure. So I guess ground rules. One thing we won't talk about is the Penguins and the Flyers.
Yeah, we won't talk about that.
All right, so we'll keep it civil. And so I guess the first thing, why don't you just, tell us sort of your journey.
Sure. So it's always a little bit tough for me to keep it brief. I think it's tough to bring in all the nuances, but my Reader's Digest version of my story is basically, I don't have some grand traumatic childhood. There was nothing along my journey that would have been an indicator of this being part of my journey. From what the books would say, aside from genetics, it being a part of my family, not even so much though with my immediate family. I really kind of thought this wasn't anything I'd ever have to deal with or struggle with. High school, college were pretty normal. I was one of those kids that seemed to get my attention not through negative things, but more through positive attention. And so that really drove my perfectionism and high achieving personality. I always joke that that's kind of my original drug of choice, and still now is my drug of choice, is just kind of doing more, achieving things, and kind of getting that pat on the back. So I have to keep that in check a little bit. But after college, I was kind of still go for a bit. Got engaged, was starting a new job as a registered nurse in critical care, so big learning curve there for a bit, and planning my wedding, switched jobs to a different ICU, and once I was married, we had bought our house, and I was coasting for the first time in my life. Something I'd always wanted to do was just go to work and come home and not have all this extra stuff, no homework. Um, but I think at that point, I really started to notice some uncomfortable feelings, things I didn't really understand why I was feeling the way I was. And I'd come to learn that I was starting to deal with some depression and anxiety. And I didn't really know what to do with that. I think being busy all the time covered that up probably for a couple years. But, did the easy way out kind of thing. I just wanted to do some, let's get on something to fix this, put me on an antidepressant. I want to just keep going. I didn't want to sit with someone and talk about my feelings and get vulnerable. I didn't want to spend the time or the money on the counseling or any of the other things that might have been a little bit more helpful at that time. So, along with struggling a bit with my mental health, I was also growing a bit more uncomfortable and unhappy at work, not getting some of the additional training I wanted to get, the sicker patients that I wanted to get and felt ready for, and was also starting to deal with some horizontal violence at work, some bullying. And that really played a lot into being more and more unhappy, which I didn't know how to cope with. So I think I unconsciously dealt with that initially by seeking out my original drug of choice, which was the achievement, and decided to go back to school. And so I was working full time in the ICU, going to grad school part time, and then also teaching nursing part time for one of the local community colleges and doing clinicals with their first year nursing students. And that left zero time for me. That left no time to take care of myself, to stay even mildly healthy. And my mental health just continued to decline. So I say all of that because I often get asked, why that first time? Why did you try it? I didn't start with a prescription. I just went straight to using what I could from my workplace. And things, as we know, escalated, and my use ended with overdosing in the bathroom at work on a night shift. And that was my last use of substances to date. And it was the scariest thing I've ever gone through. I did get Narcan that evening, naloxone. So I'm a huge advocate for that because it saved my life and gave me a second chance. Although I don't know if I would have wanted it at that time. I didn't think I wanted to go on, but now I'm really glad that I was given that opportunity. So that's kind of where my addiction was and what went on and what got me to recovery. It was a pretty crazy journey at that point.
So you have this experience where you overdose and you receive naloxone and you're brought back. How do you go from that, which so many people look at as career ending, to now being a certified addictions registered nurse in recovery? What has your journey been like through like both personally and like treatment standpoint, but also through being monitored in the Board of Nursing?
hmm Um, at that point, I really thought my life was over. And like I said, I don't think I would have cared if it had been. I kind of switched into save my butt mode. There wasn't anything at that point that I was doing to, you know, I got to save my career or I have to do this, because of it's the right thing or I want recovery. There was nothing in my mind about that. It was just, I know I'm in trouble. How can I lessen these consequences? So, after spending a night in the hospital, my husband finding out, my in-laws, my parents, it was knowing that I'm going to get turned into somewhere by the hospital where I was employed. And I didn't know anything about what was out there for people like me, for the impaired professional. I found the state board's monitoring program through Googling, like what addicted nurse, and figured since I was going to get turned in anyhow, I might as well beat them to it. So I called on the weekend and left a message and figured all I could do at that point was to wait it out till Monday. So that evening, thinking, what else can I do that is going to look good? I decided to go to my first Narcotics Anonymous meeting, and that kind of brought the 12-step journey into my life before I was required to do it. Um, and it was a pretty humbling experience because I was nervous I was going to go and someone was going to know me or talk about me, or I would have to, just pretend I was there for some other reason. But I had a really good experience that first meeting, and it was kind of funny. That night, one of the women there said, "Yeah, you should come tomorrow," and I was just completely beside myself because I didn't know they had these like every day. I thought this just was just a couple times a week or something like that. So I was just, what do you mean? There's one tomorrow? Yeah, there's like one like all the time. You can pretty much find it any time of the day. So I was able to get 2 meetings in before on Monday morning. The state board called me and did an evaluation on the phone and said, "Yeah, we think you're going to go to inpatient rehab," which was a brick wall. I was just, again, beside myself, and thought, like, I know this was bad. I know this was got pretty bad. It ended pretty badly here, but like maybe we don't have to go that far off the deep end. Maybe we could just do some intense counseling, something. Um, you know, they were not fond of that negotiation.
I bet not.
I didn't want them to write like non-compliant on my chart or anything like that or on my file. So I agreed to go. And they said, it's going to be 28 days. You can go tonight or you can go tomorrow morning. We'll have a bed for you. And I said, well, if I go tonight, does it count as one of those 28? And they said, yeah. Let's get this over with. So it was a lot. It was really emotional. It's funny looking back on it now. And it's, again, humbling to look back on it now. But at the time, it was a whirlwind for my husband, who still was trying to come to terms with what happened, with how he's going to deal with being at home with our 2 dogs for the next 4 weeks, getting home in time to take care of them. We don't have any kids, so we didn't have that to balance, but it was still a lot. Affording what we were going to have, our mortgage, regular bills and groceries on just one person's salary, not knowing whether or not I'd be able to keep my job. So things were a lot of fear, a lot of unknowns. But after completing rehab, I stepped down to partial again. Didn't really want to do that. Wanted to go to the next step down and do IOP. But they recommended partial, and I didn't want them to write anything on my file that made me seem like I wasn't going with the flow. So I did 6 weeks of partial hospitalization and then about 6 weeks of intensive outpatient after that. So along with the state board stuff that was starting to come in, the big scary contract that had all this legalese, I didn't know what to do. Kind of relied quite a bit on other people that I was starting to get to know that also was in the same program. They recommended a lawyer, and I got that lawyer, and he saved my life. He saved my license, so I'm entirely grateful for that, because I was initially charged with a felony of possession by fraud because of lying and taking waste that was supposed to be thrown away. And then also, well, it was just that, but then I got it dropped to a misdemeanor of theft by unlawful taking, and I was able to get into ARD, or accelerated rehabilitative disposition, and do 2 years of probation with some fines and community service, which I just finished up and applied for expungement. So it's quite the process there, but I'm really glad to have done that because I didn't have to lose my driver's license, which would have been devastating, to be able to get to treatment, get to meetings, get to these job interviews that I was eventually allowed to get back to, because I did lose my job. They let me resign, which was kind of them. But it was, a lot of fear. Like I said, throughout all of that, it's overwhelming thinking back the whole way to the beginning. But as far as how did I become what I am now, when I was allowed to return to work, it was a process that was exhausting, and I almost lost hope because I'd never had trouble finding a job before or getting something that I went after. And when I started applying, and I could I could just tell when the interview was over, because being required to tell them that I'm in this program, that I'm under contract, um, many of them were not very fond of hiring someone that could be a risk for them, that they could put all of this investment into and train, and then, what if? And so I had over 90 some applications and over 30 some interviews before I was officially offered the job that I took and am currently still in. I work as a charge nurse, a nurse coordinator in the outpatient setting, and offer opioid use disorder treatment using buprenorphine and naltrexone in a primary care based setting. So we're also caring for and treating hepatitis C and screening for other infectious diseases and handling some of those things that come along with, and also just basic primary care needs for these patients, just like any other patient walking through our door. So I think in this position, I was really lucky, and it was what was meant to happen, because um, my background was then looked at as an asset rather than something that was a nick against me in a negative light. Um, so I worked in this position for a little over a year and started thinking, I really want to get certified. And I started getting more and more interested in addictions nursing as a whole, and realizing there was even professional organizations out there that were for addiction professionals. So I got involved in some stuff and took a couple review courses, and finally sat for the exam once I had my all of the continuing education credits and the amount of hours I needed, and passed my exam. So that's how I became a certified addictions registered nurse in just January of 2019 this year.
Yeah, well, congratulations.
Thank you.
I mean, until I met you, I didn't even know that there was such a thing. Like I'd been looking around trying to figure out because I felt sort of in the same boat of, all right, I'm damaged goods. I'm gonna apply for these jobs, and good luck. Especially I've been pretty public about my recovery, but I'm like, I'm never gonna find a job. It's a good thing that I like addictions medicine, but I had no idea that there was a place for nurses. Um, when you when you were initially introduced to everything with the board and monitoring, um, how did you find it easy or difficult to navigate like what the next steps were, and what was that like? I think from like a learning process of that, being overwhelmed with all these phone calls and all these people, and what do you think may have made that easier?
I I I feel lucky to be a nurse in this program with the state, because of having PNAP, or the Pennsylvania Nurse Peer Assistance Program, as kind of that middle advocacy between me and the state, or the PHMP, the Pennsylvania Health Monitoring Program. Um, just seeing some of the difference between other healthcare professionals in recovery and nursing. Pharmacists also have kind of that advocacy agency. It's run kind of by the same people as PNAP. Um, they were kind of the ones I relied on. I called my case manager a lot, and she answers and, gave me the time that I needed to figure out what a lot of this meant. Anytime that I've called the state, I don't seem to get through to someone as easily, or I honestly don't think I've even talked to anyone with PHMP once. I think just once. So when it came to navigating all of that, I relied very heavily on my PNAP case manager and my lawyer as well. But not everyone ends up in a position where they have someone and are paying someone to be able to give them that guidance. So um, I, I I felt very lucky to have that. I don't think that would be the case for everyone who's going through something like this and is navigating something that might be a bit overwhelming, especially coming from a legal standpoint and having a lot of the language in there that is overwhelming, even for those that have higher education.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I found it really difficult to, and even still, I don't think I have a good hold on exactly what I'm doing and what I'm allowed to do, what I'm not allowed to do, and who to call if I have questions. taken a lot of time to try to figure that out. I mean, Sean, on the physician end, what's it like with you guys?
I think it's very similar. I think that you really, I mean, you have to toe the line. You have to do what they say. You don't have a choice. If you want to have a license and you want to practice, whether it's nursing or being a physician, you've got to do what they say. And I think having an attorney as a guide, though none of us want to do that because by nature, since we're helpers, your first instinct is not, oh my God, I need somebody to defend me and advocate for me. It's, oh, what can I do? Tell me what to do. Show me the way. I mean, even the way you were talking, Rachel, about I didn't want them to think this way about me, so I did it. And I didn't want them to think that way. And that's how I went. When I went in, it was just tell me what to do and I'll do it. And now my situation, I was charged with similar things to you, Rachel. And I ended up getting convicted, of a felony, acquisition of a controlled substance by misrepresentation, prescription fraud. And I left the PHP after that because I was like, whoa, why am I even staying? Which is unfortunate because there are a lot of very positive attributes to these programs which is the reason why they have such high success rates. But I mean, really, I think you do need somebody to advocate for you and guide you through the process because and most of us don't have that. Or if you've lost your license even temporarily, and you're not making money, or it's difficult to have that. And so it's a blessing, that you do. And I wish it wasn't that way, but it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
It really is.
Yeah, I guess I made that mistake because it was so discouraged. Like, you don't need an attorney. There's nothing I'm going to do anyway. You just need to do what they say. So we just didn't even go that route. And I don't know if it would have made that much of a difference anyway, but
and
it's
well, and
just
then
so
and then you're
fascinating.
labeled resistant.
Right.
You're not accepting your powerlessness. You are not letting go and turning it over, right? So it's like
Sure.
you're walking this line. Is my recovery all messed up because I'm fighting for my rights?
Right. Well, I mean, I found that, yeah,
And
I
that's tough. It's really hard.
yeah, I mean, I found that I started looking at everything that I've ever known about myself for my whole life, whether things that I liked or things that I didn't like. I found that everybody was starting to attribute it to, well, you're an addict, so these are the things that addicts do. And I had to sit there and try to figure out, boy, these are things I really liked about myself. Are these, should I not, are these bad things? And it took years of just a lot of introspective work to try to figure out, okay, no, these are positives. These I might be a little overboard with, need to tone down, but for the most part.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, and it comes back to what Rachel was saying before about the defects, how they can be positives or negatives, but we're just human. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
if somebody's threatening you, threatening your career, your ability to provide for your family, you're going to get defensive. It's going to be uncomfortable. There's going to be a lot of fear. And like that's normal, but suddenly you're made to feel like you've gone off the reservation, you're an addict, you've lost control, you can't make decisions for yourself, you can't think for yourself, you're and in some respects early on maybe that's true, but it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah, it's an understatement.
Yeah, it's another
Mm-hmm.
as we all know, all
Yeah.
three of us.
So let me ask this. So you're in recovery now and you work in this job. Like, what is that like to now get the opportunity to every day spend time with people who suffer with the same thing you do? I mean, can you talk about that?
Absolutely. Um, I think that it was kind of similar for my family, at least, as to me going to a 12-step meeting. They were fearful, or you're spending all this time around people that might be triggering to you, or they might, try to bring you down to whatever they're doing or where they're at. And, it's really not like that for me. Just like, going to a support group meeting was not like that for me. I get what I'm looking for. So I'm looking to help people and to relate with them and help them to get to where they want to be. And so that's exactly what I find. And I'm very passionate as well about self-disclosure. It took me a little bit to get comfortable with doing that, and the fear surrounding it of what if someone finds out about this, or what if I lose an opportunity because of this. But it was easiest for me to start with my patients because, there was not much that they could do with that information aside from, find me more approachable. And I keep that in check as well, and work on, am I disclosing this information for them or for myself? And so long as it's to help them, it's been a really positive experience letting them know, like, I understand where you're coming from. Our stories might be very different, but the underlying feelings, the underlying experience is the same. And, I just want you to know that you're understood by someone. And I've had a really good response from a lot of people with that. And it seems like I'll even have patients that just open up like a flower when the sun is coming up, because they finally feel like they don't have to hold back, and they can maybe even speak freely, not having to choose their words or their language. It just, the power of vulnerability and the power of relating and the power of community, it's just been the cornerstone to my recovery and my practice as a certified addictions nurse.
Yeah, it's really great. Because, yeah, it's interesting. Some people might think that might be triggering, or a dangerous place to be so close to it. But I guess it's a lot of knowing yourself and what makes you tick. Because for the longest time, I stayed out of medicine because I was convinced by some people that probably wasn't good for me. But realizing that was probably the worst thing for me was to stay away from what I felt like I was born to do, and I don't know. It's just always what made me feel so whole, is to take care of people.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, going through all of this and then going into a field directly related to it, it seemed to fill this void inside of me that I didn't realize I even had. Um, I It works well for me to be passionate outside of my work and within my work about the same thing, and kind of ties together this larger theme to my life. So that's worked out really well. And I'm very fortunate to not have a lot of access to controlled substances. I don't feel triggered by the ones that we do use. And that's really not a lot. We might be prescribing buprenorphine in the sublingual form, but I really don't have it a lot, aside from if a patient doesn't use a couple and we're counting them whenever they bring them back in. Until more recently, we started offering injectable buprenorphine. So that is something that I'm now administering, but it's not anything that has made me feel any less strong in my roots in my recovery.
So how long were you using opiates?
My addiction journey from start to finish was probably about 9 months, I'd estimate. It was relatively short from start to finish.
Okay. And I'm sure through group and therapy, did you explore some of the reasons? Because I know, like, for me, and Bill and I have spoken, not just childhood stuff, but, traumas later in life, and not wanting to deal with my emotions. And was there may not have been one event, but were there specific things that you struggled with, or shame, or self-esteem issues? Because that, for me, that was so big, and that like fueled it all. And so was there anything like that, and how have you like worked through that? And I know, like, with legal consequences, shame and stigma is massive, and can play a big role, and is a real can re-traumatize in a very big way and kind of take us back down to that very uncomfortable feeling and want us to. So I don't know if I think I asked multiple questions there, but
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I think that so for me, that perfectionism that I talked about and that high achieving personality, I found that like after the academic world, the playing field evens out. There was no grade scale. There was no someone got an A and someone got a B. So it was harder for me to achieve because I always wanted to be the best. And that was, a big driving factor about going into critical care because I felt like I was taking care of the sickest and the neediest. And I needed that in my life at that time. But I couldn't find the thing I thought I needed, which was that achievement. And that just added to my mental health. And what happened through, using substances and initially feeling like that took away the emotions that I hated feeling, that I didn't know how to cope with. And then the shame of what I knew I was doing and how that could potentially, cause a lot of problems and bring a lot of consequences into my life. The only thing that took that away, that shame, was using again. So the cycle then led to it, becoming more severe and finally getting caught and getting in trouble was like jumping into ice cold water. And it's what I needed to like get off of my high horse a little bit and gain some humility. I needed to know that there was no like, I'm going to be this, wonderful, perfect person that has nothing wrong with them and is going to achieve XYZ and do it better than these 5,000 people, like it's just not going to happen. So I needed that humility. I needed to be able to recognize that I can do well at something and not have to trample other people along the way to the top. There's room for us all up there. So like, let's, bring everyone in. So like, I'm still very competitive, but at the same time, I want other people to, join hands with me and like, let's all go there. I'm not so much like going to be throwing elbows on the way. But I think what, to kind of wrap up and answer your question more specifically is, yeah, the mental health stuff definitely played into it. The perfectionism played into it, and then shame played into the continuation. But I needed kind of thrown into some more shame, which did end up happening with the legal consequences. And once my charges were filed, I, made the front page of my local newspaper, and it was out there. And so that also meant Facebook, which the comment section was not supportive.
Yeah, don't read those.
Yeah, no, not great.
That's what I was told by a journalist. He's like, don't look at the comments.
Yeah, just turn them off.
Yeah.
But
you want to know, but you don't want to know.
yes. And even if I didn't, like my family was, like there's my mom reading that and seeing the things that were being said about her daughter, But it was okay because I had the means to cope with it at that time. Because if all of those things had happened back before all the support, back before learning all of the coping mechanisms that I did throughout treatment and throughout, working with other people that had gone through the same thing, I don't think I'd be okay. I also think, my charges and everything were filed about 6 months into my recovery, and it gave me a strong foundation of coping mechanisms and support that they were the only thing that got me through that. That
was my experience. That was my my charges were filed almost a year and a half into recovery.
Wow.
In fact, I was doing an addiction medicine fellowship at the time.
Oh.
I was changing specialties. But but to your point, if I didn't have that support, absolutely no way. I would, like, people ask me that all the time. Like, do you think you would have been able to manage? I was like, absolutely not. I'm not sure I would have made it, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think if you're on the same wavelength as me, I'm picking up kind of what you're saying. And I don't think I would have attempted to leave this world. I would have attempted to make it out of here, because I don't think I would have been able to cope with going on. And I'm so glad that's not the case. I'm so glad.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
need that connection, not just for recovery, but to just be successful in life. Because I think, like what Bill was talking about earlier about having a purpose, like
Hmm.
you were able to retain your license, you were able to practice nursing. Now you're able to practice addiction nursing. I mean, that is a powerful, from your story and what you've achieved and the mountains you've climbed and all the work you've done. I mean, to pass that on is the greatest gift. And like we had a guest recently who was talking about his experience and how the federal government won't pay for him to care for people because he has a felony conviction.
Hmm.
He turned his life around. It's been many years. And when I think about it, when we think about it, it's like this is the perfect guy. This is the guy who should be doing this work. And
Right.
there's all these barriers and laws, and we're all human. And healthcare professionals make mistakes. And yes, they have power and they have access to these powerful substances. And it's a shame because I think there's a lot of people suffering. Number one, who won't reach out for help, and two, they make mistakes within their profession and they should be allowed to move on. Of course, there's certain outlying, cases that maybe that's not the best thing, but I think there's many who should be practicing that aren't, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
it's interesting. When I was first going through it and I went down pretty fast, and it was about 6 months or so until I was homeless and the whole thing. But like there were many times that I either attempted suicide, that I was like, I just can't do this, and other times where I pushed the limit so far, hoping that it would just end because I didn't think I had the courage to do it myself. And I mean, so for about 3.5 years, I didn't have that support at all. And then, I did have a period where I was in recovery for a couple of years, but I didn't do any work on myself at all to identify things, and I had no community. So when I relapsed or had this recurrence of use, like it was bad, and I was back to considering just ending it all pretty regularly. I mean, that's when I got to the end of the road. I was staying with my father-in-law, who's a police chief, and he left his service weapon there the one day, and I sat there looking at it, thinking, maybe I should just put a bullet in my brain and end it. But I mean, ultimately, I got help. But I guess my overall point is it's just fascinating that this time in recovery, like I've connected with other people who either do or have done the job that I did, who are other healthcare professionals. And my recovery this time around is so different, and it feels so much more solid than it ever did before because I'm being encouraged in a way that I hadn't been before. And it's with people who understand. Even when I first went into treatment and different treatment centers, I didn't go into places that had a program for healthcare professionals, and I was the only one there. And so when I would say, I'm a nurse and I was using heroin, it was immediately, well, how could you do that? Didn't you know better? You should have known better. And I'm like, I'm here doing the same thing you are, bud. But I mean, they just did not understand how someone. I mean, they always say, you're supposed to be smarter than that. Yeah, that's what I would hear that routinely
It
from
doesn't work
not
that
just
way.
well, and not even just from the other patients. Like this is from staff. Like, how could you do that? How could you be so stupid to decide to use heroin? And I'm like, yeah, because everybody on the right mind just makes that decision. But it
What
was
other
just
disease do we say that?
right. Well, that too.
You
But it was
shouldn't be
just
eating sugar. You're diabetic. Don't
yeah.
eat that candy bar. Like,
But I had no. I mean, it was. I mean, you talk about isolation all the time, Sean, and this was so isolating. Like, here I am, to the point that I need help. I want help, and I desperately want to get out of this, and I feel alienated, even in the place where I'm supposed to get help, because of how I identify myself, and like where my identity is wrapped up in the job that I do in my career. And it was a really lonely, lonely place.
Do
did
you
you
think
find that, Rachel? Did you? Because I don't really hear that from you. That feeling of being isolated and marginalized and stigmatized. Like I don't know. Bill and I talk about it a lot, and that
yeah.
was a very awful feeling for me, and I know for him too. To feel like, because I always say like addiction's a disease of isolation, and connection is the answer, right?
Hmm.
And so and the way we are treated as healthcare professionals when we struggle with addiction or mental health issues is frequently isolation and marginalization and stigmatizing and all this, the worst stuff, the
Mhm.
opposite of what we really want and need. Did
Yes.
you feel that?
I think I did quite a bit in my active addiction, but not really putting a label on myself. I just kind of felt like everyone was getting in the way. So I didn't want them to be in the way, and that include pushing my family aside, pushing my friends aside, but more than anyone, my husband. So, I think that that was a lonelier time than I realized because that I covered that up with quite a bit of substances as well. Um, but as far as kind of like in treatment and stuff, I didn't really experience that too much, but I think the treatment center I went to was, pretty well versed in having healthcare professionals that were, using whether it was alcohol or substances that were taken from the workplace. Um, but I think that's what my kind of like throwback question to Bill was, do you think that maybe that was because of it being street drugs, right? Like, do you think that that stigmatization came because, oh, well, we understand if you're like the kid in the candy store at work, but why would you do this if you could just do this, you know?
That's
Yeah, I
a
mean,
great question.
there was I mean, that was one of the, in the beginning, because I mean, mine did originally start from, from IV Dilaudid, but I felt so torn taking it from
Hmm.
work. Like, I mean, it was in the beginning, it was just an accidental thing. I was working in the ICU, and I was depressed, and I went home, and I just forgot to throw it out because you take it, and you multi-dose people all the time, and you just forget.
Yeah.
But I remember looking at it, thinking, let me give this a shot and see what happens, and it was just so wonderful. To not be depressed, to not be happy, but I wasn't sad. I just felt so neutral, and to be someone who was like the type A and very driven and always on to the next thing. I knew something wasn't right with the depression. I just didn't feel like I was at the same level that I expected that I should be at. And when I took opioids, I felt like I was back functioning and on my game. Like I wasn't, clearly, but I thought I was. But I was so torn about taking drugs that, I mean, it was less than a month until I found street heroin and started using that. So, and I didn't go to treatment for, I mean, it was a while. Like I was homeless for a while, and like I went pretty far down the, you know, down into addiction. But so when I went, I would tell them the beginning of this story. Well, I mean, first the other patients wanted to know, how much different was it than heroin? Was it better? It was more of like, shop talk with them. But as we got further into it, like there was this clear line. It's just interesting. One, there was definitely a viewpoint of, I can't believe you would do that. When I go to the hospital, I trust people like you. But at the same time, when I crossed into street heroin, there was definitely a clear divide in a lot of people's mind of that's a lot different. And I think that, I mean, it's sort of a segue into, but I do think that that's the interesting thing right now. But the narrative of, the white suburban kid who gets a sporting accident, gets prescribed, Percocet or something, and becomes addicted and overdoses. It's this narrative, this accidental addiction, and there are cases of that, but there's a lot of other cases of people like me who got prescribed them, but I didn't use them for what they were prescribed for. I used, it was an appropriate prescription that I used inappropriately. But that division, whether I decided to use substances for a non prescribed reason, doesn't make me any different from a person suffering with an illness that deserves treatment than the person who accidentally becomes addicted. But I think pushing the other narrative has really driven a further divide in how we're looked at. If you go into a treatment center and you're there for pills, you're looked at and treated quite differently than someone who's shooting heroin.
Right, right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was my drug of choice was fentanyl. I straight to the needle. I was injecting it. I was starting my own IVs and, using that multiple times because it was easier than just, poking myself every time. So
Same
like
thing.
it was, craziness, but I thought I knew enough about it. I thought I know that this is pretty powerful, but I know the doses, I know the side effects. I can kind of monitor myself and make sure that it's okay. And I got asked the other day when I spoke at a local high school, why would you do fentanyl? It's all over the news and how bad it is and how scary it is. And it was a good teachable moment to teach them about, this is a medication as well. It's been used for quite some time in medical settings. It's going to continue to be used for quite some time in medical settings. I think it was like the same shock factor as I would have to deal with my patients with propofol, Diprovan after the Michael Jackson death because they saw someone died from it and why is my family member on that? Um, so it was similar to that and explaining that to them, but it 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 didn't faze me, like I didn't look at it as any worse or better or, it was the route that I preferred and it was the substance that I could get most frequently,
Well, goes back a bit to your perfectionism, right? You're going to
Yeah,
do it right. You're going to use the best narcotic that's
right.
tried and true. You're going to put the IV in a sterile way, and everything and line everything up.
Yeah.
I mean we're control. It's funny. I thought I was easygoing and laid back, and I was a control freak and a perfectionist, just
Mhm.
like you. I wasn't using opiates. I was using cocaine, but I was using that to medicate, trauma and stuff like that. Did I dabble in other stuff? Absolutely. But yeah, it goes back to that perfectionism and control and the ego and all the things that, in the right doses are great qualities. In the wrong dose
Yeah.
Mhm.
will take us, to a bad place pretty fast.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I did the same kind of stuff. It was just constant pushing to see how much further. I mean, because then I got to the point that, yeah, I was taking fentanyl and using that to mix with the street heroin instead of water and completely thinking that I was in control, that nothing bad would happen. And because, you know, I was the smart guy because I would take fentanyl and I would take naloxone from work just in case, as if I could self-administer it to myself or
The
something.
mad scientist, yeah.
Right.
And what
Yeah,
happens
it's
if you go a
exactly it.
little too far, right? I mean,
Yeah.
where's the Narcan?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is amazing looking back at all the things where I thought that I was in control, or I thought that I was making smart or safe decisions, or as safe as I could, and I wasn't. I mean, there's really no reason why I should have survived. I mean, given the amount of things that I was trying, and but I mean, the flip side is that I had such deep emotional pain that I was just trying to get squashed. That I think I focused my attention more on experimenting, like Sean said, the mad scientist, in the basement trying to figure out, well, I wonder what this would do, and you know, yeah, it's unbelievable the further as you progress further into it, how you just start your decision making. I mean, Sean said this the other day. You can't even see it. It's one of those things. Everybody around you sees it, but you're always the last one to figure it out.
Hmm. Yeah. I became two different people. There was like the person that I was that I knew that I wanted to be, and this other person that like I couldn't get this monkey off my back. They had to be there. They were the conjoined twin. The only way I could function was to stay with that person, but yet they were the weight I was carrying at the same time. I'll always think back to like one of the exercises we did in inpatient treatment and we had to kind of draw our addiction and I drew Rachel as the Jekyll Hyde nurse, these two different pictures of me and this two-faced kind of life that I was living because here I am doing all these amazing things and getting told, "Wow, how are you doing this full time teaching and then doing school and it's just incredible." And having my nursing students like, "Thank you so much, Mrs. Schuster. You're just such a good teacher. I thank you for showing me this." And then meanwhile, like what I'm doing in the other world that I lived in, it was just it's weird to think that both of those things were even going on at the same times because they feel so separate, yet they only functioned because of each other. Um, it was a wild ride. Wild ride. I don't care to go back to that.
I don't think any of us do.
No.
I mean, that's sort of, I mean, in one way, that's kind of one of the reasons why we started the podcast is, I was like, we need to talk about this more and have stuff out there for other people to feel more connected, and in a sense to help prevent us from ever thinking that that's a good idea again to go back to.
And we can find so much of that connection with other people in recovery, but something that I longed for and was so hard to find was other people, other healthcare professionals that had gone through or were going through or went through what I did. And, I wanted that so badly. I remember in rehab, it was a little bit funny at first. They called me Nurse Jackie. It was a big joke. So, I kind of rolled with it. But someone came in, and the girl that they brought with them, she came in to give her lead, and they brought the friend. The friend had been someone who was also in the program, and I just, like a magnet, went to her, like, this is what I'm going through. This is what I'm facing. Like, what do you think? What's your story? Because there were so many people there that I had learned from and was learning from, but I needed someone with the nuances that being a healthcare professional going through this brings. And it's hard to find. We get hooked up with, healthcare professional support groups and stuff like that, but that wasn't right away. That was like 2 months into it, and I needed that faster. So, if this is out there, if this was searchable and someone finds it, I hope they listen to it, because I think this is why I do want to put myself out there and be vulnerable, even though it's still terrifying, because I want someone to know, like, you're not alone. You'll get through this. Don't feel like it's so dark right now. Hold on to that little glimpse of light, because we're here with you to guide you.
Yeah, and that sounds like a great place to sort of wrap up. I mean, do you have anything else, Sean, that you'd want to ask?
That's
I mean,
great.
that
I
was-
always have more questions.
Yeah.
But I
No, I
think
mean,
this
I
is
thought
great.
that was
and
fantastic.
what you said, Rachel, is like perfect. I mean, that is the reason for doing this. Both of us believe it's much needed. Healthcare professionals are suffering at higher rates than the rest of the population, and there's a lot of fear, and that fear is real. And Bill and I have spoken recently about, we wish something like this existed. We wish we heard stories and knew, about these struggles early on, because, I don't know, if it would have been different, but I would have had a chance, I think, a better chance at finding recovery earlier.
Yeah.
And being healthier. And most of us, we're afraid, and for good reason. And then with, I always say, shame can't survive in the light. And so being open and honest, and we are not the only ones. There are thousands and thousands of us in this country, nurses, doctors, paramedics, that are suffering right now, that are working, and that it may not end well for them. And I think it's a public health crisis. I really do, that is not addressed. And I think the stigma within the medical community is as great as anywhere, maybe worse. Look at how we treat our own.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, you wrapped up nicely, and I can talk forever, and I'll shut up now. But this is great. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you guys so much for putting this together and for inviting me to be a guest on it. I really love what you're doing, so thank you again.
All right, Rachel. Well, thank you. And so how can people find you?
I'm on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @mynameisRachel. I can also be found on other social media realms, but that might be a good place to start.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for being our guest, and we're sure this is going to help a lot of people.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Health Professionals in Recovery. Please visit our website at www.healthprosinrecovery.com and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. You can also follow us on Twitter at HPIR Podcast. If you are struggling with substance use disorder and need help, please call the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration at 1-800-662-4357. Take it from us, people can and do recover.